to Comfort Crime with Lindsay Sanchez, a cozy mystery podcast where no actual crimes have been committed. Today, we'll continue Murder on Maple Mountain, a cozy mystery with an amateur sleuth, a second chance romance, and a killer who won't stop until they finished what was started 12 years ago. If this is your first time here, welcome, and please start with episode 1, chapter 1, or feel free to start with season 1, which is the prequel short story, Death at Dogwood Lake. There is a link to both in the show notes, or you can find them at comfortcrime.com. For everyone else, we'll continue to chapter 19 and 20, but first, an update. The exciting news for this week I just mentioned in the intro, and I know you all caught it because we're sleuths here, and yes, it's finally happening. This week we have a double episode, the one you've all been waiting for, just like I promised, and we're so close to the final chapters of this book. The excitement, the nerves, the bittersweet feeling of wrapping up a story that we've poured our hearts into. It's all coming. We are barreling towards the finish line, and I wanted to make sure we got there together without leaving anyone on a cliffhanger for too long. Okay, maybe just a little cliffhanger. It is a mystery novel after all. So settle into your favorite cozy chair, or if you're like me and my friends, get your dish gloves and garden gloves out and get ready. Things are about to get very interesting in these final chapters. And don't worry about what's coming next or how we'll survive the summer break. I'm already planning bonus episodes and stories to bridge the gap and keep us connected, but we're not ready for those yet, so no spoilers. Stay tuned, the clues are coming. And lastly, I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my mystery-loving heart. Whether you've been here from the very first episode or you just stumbled in somewhere around chapter 12, I genuinely cannot put into words how much sharing this journey with you means to me. Every message, every reply, every little note you've sent along the way, it's magic. You are the reason I do this, and I appreciate every single one of you more than you know. Last time, after sending Rose to the hospital with Lisa, Georgia and Jake read Ivy's letter, the one that started this whole mess. It was an autopsy report for an accidental death that happened 12 years ago. Only the report didn't say it was an accident. It said it was cyanide. They rushed to Frank's house to confirm the murder by cyanide, and Georgia finally had the last clue she needed to discover the murderer. Murder on Maple Mountain, Chapter 19. The longer Georgia's phone rang, the deeper her heart sank. The call clicked over to voicemail. She hung up on the robotic version of her dad's voice, telling her to leave a message. She'd have to face the truth alone. She'd have to press on without definitive evidence. Evidence would have been nice. It would have allowed her to call Officer Briggs and lay out all the facts. It would have allowed her to sit back and let the police do their job. Evidence she didn't have and didn't need to know who had poisoned the cake. There was only one person who could be responsible for the murders now. She'd known it the second she'd seen Tom Harding's autopsy, and now she knew why. Greed. It really was a deadly sin. We have to get to the hospital, now. Georgia dialed another number, her initial panic turning to desperation. I'll try Lisa again. Why? Frank stumbled back as if the words had physically hit him. "Who's at the hospital?" Holding the ringing phone to her ear, Georgia exchanged a glance with Jake. This wasn't the time for him to find out about Rose, but they couldn't leave him here either, in case the killer came back. "Come with us, Frank," Jake said, understanding Georgia without words. "We'll tell you about it on the way." "I'm not going anywhere until you tell me what's going on." Frank folded his arms in a way that would have been like a petulant child if he were anyone else. "Besides, I'm in my bathrobe." Georgia shook her head, a slight back and forth, using her eyes to say, "Don't tell him." She couldn't afford Frank guessing who the killer was, because if he found out, there was zero chance he'd get in the car and drive with them to the hospital. Rose or not, if Frank had the identity of Ivy's killer, they'd have to physically stop him from going after them. "Come on." Jake opened the coat closet and pulled out a full-length dress coat. "This will cover your robe." "I'm not going anywhere in my bedclothes," Frank repeated. "But if you'll allow me 5 minutes to change and tell me who we're visiting, I'd be happy to accompany you." The call went to voicemail, like Georgia's dad had. Lisa didn't answer the phone. "We're going to visit one of my mom's friends." Georgia's voice was high and tight, like she was lying, though it was technically true. "And we don't have time for you to change." She opened the door and stepped onto Frank's porch, the steps still lit by a single light above the stairs. "My friend knew Tom Harding. I think she'll want to hear about this report coming from you, since you're a scientist." Frank mumbled something about not being a scientist anymore and wanting to put on pants, but he must have sensed Georgia's distress because he put his arms into the coat Jake was holding for him. Georgia breathed a little easier, knowing they weren't going to have to physically force Frank into the car. Every second they were on this mountain, every second they were the only ones who knew about the autopsy report and the cyanide, was another second the killer could use to get away. Or worse, finish Rose. She wasn't just in danger, she was in peril. It wasn't enough, even with Frank coming willingly. Even if they got in the car and sped down the mountain, straight to the hospital, they wouldn't be fast enough. The killer could already be there. Georgia dialed another number. Evidence or no, it was time to bring in the police. If anything happened to Rose or another person because she couldn't convince them of the truth, she'd never be able to forgive herself. "I'll grab the car." Georgia blinked back tears and turned, walking down the step towards Frank's garage, her phone ringing in her ear. The keys would be in his Jeep. They always were. "Don't move," a deep voice said from the shadows, as something hard pressed against her back. "Don't scream or I'll shoot." "You don't have to do this," Georgia said, putting her hands up instinctively, like she was surrendering. "You could walk away right now, like none of this ever happened." "We both know that's not true," the killer said, his voice sounding almost amused as he dug what Georgia could only assume was the barrel of a gun deeper into her side. "You guys don't have to come," Georgia yelled back to the house, trying to save Jake and Frank from the same fate. "You're taking too long. I'll go to the hospital by myself. You stay here." "We're coming." Jake stepped onto the porch, holding his hand out to Frank, helping him down the steps. He wrapped Frank's hand around his arm when they made it to the salted driveway. "Where are you?" He squinted in the darkness and at the closed garage. "She can't have left already," Frank said. "We would have heard the engine." "You guys go on without me," Georgia tried again, feeling remarkably calm for someone being held hostage. But if the killer was here with her, he wasn't going after Rose, and he wasn't going after anyone else. Jake froze, tensing in the driveway like a deer in headlights, or a bobcat sensing its next meal. Prey or predator, Georgia couldn't tell, but it was clear he suddenly knew exactly what was going on. "Go back inside, Frank," he said, low and steady. "I thought we were going to the hospital." "We will," Jake reassured him, "but I think you're right about wearing pants. It's more respectful and dignified." "That's true." Frank shuffled back toward the door. "Sorry, but your antics, amusing as they are, won't work," the killer whispered in Georgia's ear, wrapping his hand around her shoulders and pulling her against him, moving the gun from her side to her temple. "Your friends are coming with us," he said, moving her deeper into the trees. Georgia tried to resist, but he was so big, so strong, he probably didn't even notice, like she was a dead leaf trying to resist the wind. "Tell them to go back to the porch," the killer said calmly. "I left zip ties by the boxwood. Tell them to tie themselves up." "Let them go," Georgia pleaded. "They don't even know who you are yet." "Yet," he repeated. "I believe that, but they know enough. Too much. I can't leave any loose ends. You understand." She did. He couldn't go on living here, or even go into hiding without someone eventually finding the truth. Frank and Jake might not know who he was, but they soon would, especially if Georgia also disappeared. Whether she and Jake had a future together or not, he cared about her enough that he wouldn't rest until he found out what had happened to her. He had all the pieces of the puzzle. He just hadn't put them together yet. But he would. If Georgia were a killer, she wouldn't let them go either. "Get in the house, Frank." Jake's fist clenched as he waited, unflinching in the driveway for the old man to leave, clearly planning his attack. "What's going on?" Frank hesitated, his brain not processing like Jake's had that they were in danger. "Where did Georgia go?" "Tell them." The killer dug the gun into her throat. "If they take another step, I'll shoot." "Jake?" Georgia's voice shook as she called out. "Frank, don't move. He says to zip tie your hands together. He left some by the porch." The men stopped. "Who?" Jake yelled, moving in the direction of Georgia's voice. "Tell him not to come any closer or I'll shoot you," the killer said. "He says he'll shoot me if you come closer," Georgia said, if only to get the gun away from the side of her neck. With every step Jake took, the killer pushed it harder into Georgia, making her pulse crash against the cold metal, making her feel lightheaded. To Georgia's relief, Jake stopped, a few yards from where the killer held her, hidden in the trees. "Who?" Jake yelled again, his anger visibly rippling through him. "Don't tell him." The killer's hot breath steamed in George's ear, his voice light, playful, like he was enjoying all the power, the pain. She cringed, but he didn't have to tell her twice. He hadn't really had to tell her once. She wouldn't have said his name. She wasn't going to give this man one more reason to justify what he was trying to do. "He says he'll shoot us all," she said instead, making sure her friends knew exactly what they were dealing with. Jake cursed. "Tell them to use the zip ties." "He says to use the zip ties," Georgia said, already tired of being an unnecessary translator. If it weren't for the gun on her neck, she would have told this guy exactly where he could put his zip ties. Jake cursed again and went back to the porch. He tied Frank's wrists together, then wrapped a tie around his own and fed the end through the eye, slowly pulling on the tail, looking around as he tightened it notch by notch, as if hatching a plan. "Tell him to hurry," the man behind Georgia said, as the gun rested heavy against her collarbone. It was clear Jake was stalling, weighing his options and looking for a way out. "Tell him," he prodded. "He says to hurry." Georgia tried to keep her voice calm and steady, but as much as she told herself logically that she wasn't in danger, her voice didn't believe her. Her body knew the truth. She was in very real danger, just not yet. If the killer wanted to shoot her there, he would have already. But shooting any of them on Frank's doorstep would be messy. And after leaving Rose bleeding, but still conscious in the road, the last thing he needed was another mess. Jake must have heard her fear, because he pulled the tie until it was clear he couldn't get out, then turned toward the trees. "You can come out now, you lousy coward," he yelled. The killer didn't move. "Tell them to take the trail to Dogwood Lake." He pointed the gun at the path that snaked through Frank's yard and continued up the mountain. "You've got to be kidding me." Georgia didn't want to hike up the mountain with a gun shoved in her back, or at her head, or any part of her body, and she really didn't want to end up face down in Dogwood Lake like Tom Harding. Standing in Frank's yard, being held hostage and barking second-hand commands at her friends was bad enough. Hiking up a mountain to their inevitable death would be much worse. "Tell them," he growled, digging the barrel of the gun into the soft flesh of her neck. "He says to take the trail to Dogwood Lake," she yelled, wincing at the gun's pressure on her throat. "We'll be behind you." "I'll go first," Jake told Frank. "Put your hands on my shoulder to steady yourself." "You really don't have to do this," she said to the man behind her as he pushed her through the trees toward the trail. "The less people you kill, the less time you'll have in prison." He laughed, a loud, long bark, like an angry dog. "I think after you murder 2 innocent old ladies, it's life in prison any way you cut the cake. I need a scapegoat." "You're going to frame Frank," she guessed, the whole twisted plan coming to light. "That's why you were waiting in the shadows. Jake and I are collateral damage." "It didn't have to be this way," he said, sounding disappointed, almost wistful. "Nobody else had to get hurt. Even Ivy wouldn't have died if you all just kept your noses in your own business, where they belong. I never wanted to kill any of you. That wasn't the plan." But you hid the real autopsy 12 years ago. Why? The only answer was money. He would have had no other motivation. It was almost painfully obvious now, but she wanted to hear it from him. She wanted to make him say it. Keep quiet. He ignored her questions, dragging her up the path with him. Just run away, she said, half walking, half locked under his arm in an awkward side hug, like the most dangerous three-legged race in the world. Just hide out in a different state, like Doug Barlow did. We all know how that turned out. Plus, I've dug my hole too deep. And we're your ladder, Georgia said. He grunted in response, his eyes never leaving Frank and Jake, his gun never leaving Georgia's neck. Don't take us to the lake, she said awkwardly, stumbling on something in the path, catching herself on the tree, the bark tearing into the palm of her hand. Please don't take us to Dogwood Lake. She had spent the last 12 years avoiding the place. As much as she thought she'd gotten over what had happened and how she'd found Tom, she hadn't. As much as she told herself she'd moved on, being with Jake, climbing up the trail, it made her realize she was far from over any of it. She hadn't healed. She'd been hiding. And she didn't want to spend her last moments in the place she never wanted to see again. Murder on Maple Mountain, Chapter 20. Please. Georgia stumbled again, holding on to the tree to steady herself. She pressed her fingers to the palms of her hands to stop the stinging. Please don't take us to the lake. Ahead, the small trail from Sunset Cabin Glen merged with the larger one, the main trail that Georgia and Jake had once hiked. The trail that led to a parking lot on one end and Dogwood Lake on the other. This time of year there would be no wildflowers or sunshine, only weak moonlight and shadows from the past. Two figures, Frank and Jake, waited by the wooden sign labeling the diverging paths. I'm not taking you to the lake. The man with the gun laughed at the idea. I have a much better plan. Keep going. They hiked up. The man stopped Georgia in the shadows of the last clump of trees before the sign. Tell them to go up, he said, still hiding, still keeping his identity a mystery to the men ahead of them. But they must have guessed. They must know by now who was orchestrating this impromptu party. Georgia kept trudging, making the killer half drag her up the mountain. She whacked through the thin brush and deep snow, racking her brain. Maybe it was the dark, or the shock of being forced up a mountain at gunpoint, but it took Georgia longer than it should have for her to realize where they were headed. As the snow got deeper and the mountain steeper, she thought they really should be wearing snowshoes. And it clicked. You're taking us to the mine. It's the perfect place for an accident. And I'm sure old Frankie boy doesn't know this, but it all started with him back in the day, so it's only right it should end with him. What do you mean? Georgia slowly reached into her coat pocket, careful to make the arm movement seem natural. She knew exactly what he meant. She'd read Tom's autopsy report. She'd seen Frank's company logo in the corner. But if she could make him say it, if she could hit the camera button on her phone, she could record his confession. Then finally she'd have the evidence, and it wouldn't require digging up dead bodies or any more breaking and entering. All she needed was to capture his words here and now. Then she, Jake, and Frank could find a way to escape. This guy holding the gun had turned cold-blooded somewhere along the way, out of desperation, selfishness, and stupidity. But so far he had yet to intentionally kill. Well, anyone but Doug Barlow, and as far as Georgia could tell, Doug had had it coming from one direction or another. She inched her finger toward the side button on her phone. "What are you doing?" The killer paused. "My hands are cold." "Get them where I can see them." "It's not like I have a gun or anything," she mumbled, sulking to distract him as she clicked the camera button twice, then pulled her hand out, making it seem like she was innocent, like she hadn't just pushed record, or at least what she hoped was record. Now she just had to get him talking again. "This isn't Frank's fault," she said, goading. "You're the one who killed people. You're the one responsible." She was fishing, but it was also true. Regardless of whatever mistakes Frank or his lab had made 12 years ago, this man had killed 2 people and critically injured another. The wrong paperwork hadn't forced 3 busybodies up a mountain at gunpoint. This was all his own fault. This had started with him taking advantage. "What do you know?" He gave her a little shove on her shoulder. She stumbled, but caught her balance before falling face first into the powdery snow. 12 years ago, my wife left me, and my kids hated me, and I don't blame them. I was a loser. But that day, when I pulled Tom out of the water, I noticed something nobody else did. That day, I was the smartest guy at the lake, and I knew I could use it to make my life better." Tom drowned. Eric punched him and left him face down to die. "I know you saw the autopsy." He laughed under his breath. "Playing dumb won't save you this time." "What are you talking about?" Tom had bruises from the blow, and he was waterlogged, being submerged for so long, but there was something else. "What?" Despite herself, Georgia was curious. What had tipped this man off about the cyanide? She was pretty sure it wasn't one of Lisa's lavender almond cupcakes. His cheeks. They were bright red. It was like he was wearing makeup or something. He paused, checking on the men in front and their progress up the trail. "Jake probably told you his grandpa worked at the mine. Did he tell you my grandpa worked right there with him? Gave his life working down there?" Georgia didn't answer, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other and letting him do the talking. "Did he?" The killer grabbed her arm. "No." Georgia pulled away. "Let go. He didn't tell me anything." "Do you know what my grandpa died of?" "Cyanide?" Georgia guessed to herself. There was a theme to the murders. She'd thought it had been about convenience and proximity to poison, but there clearly was also some generational trauma and revenge playing out in a deadly game this man was orchestrating. Now that Georgia thought about it, Ivy's cheeks had been red, and Barlow in the hot tub. That wasn't just a warning to stay away. That was a copycat. Doug had been poisoned and dumped in the hot tub, just like Tom had been poisoned and been left in the lake. She wanted him to say it. She wanted to get it on her phone. She wanted the proof. What did he die of? Cyanide, the man confirmed. I've heard the stories of his death my whole life. My dad told me about how the other workers should have known the signs. They should have helped him get fresh air. They should have limited his exposure or taken him to the doctor. But they didn't. They let him die. So that day at the lake, when I lifted Tom up for your dad to take a picture, I knew this was more than an accidental manslaughter from a teenager's punch. I knew someone else had been at that lake. When it turned out to be Doug Barlow, I knew we had a killer. But then, imagine my surprise when the autopsy came back clean. No poison, no cyanide. Imagine when across my desk came a golden opportunity. He chuckled at the memory. I could have called them out on it. I knew better than anyone, except for Barlow, exactly what had killed Tom Harding. But that wasn't going to bring him back, and Eric had punched him, had left him in the lake. And he was a kid. He wasn't going to prison for too long. You ruined his life. Georgia couldn't stay silent anymore. I gave him a valuable lesson. Check yourself before somebody does it for you. He was a spoiled brat. I did him a favor. What about Ivy? You do her a favor too? Ivy and I... He paused, his breath hitching for one tiny moment. We never liked each other, that's no secret, but my ex-wife loved her. She'd never forgive me for murdering her. You did all this to get your ex back? You think she'd be fine with you killing Rose? Barlow? You think she wants to be with a murderer? I'm not going to tell her about them. He laughed again, like he was really enjoying himself now. In fact, I'm going to be the hero. I'm going to find the bomb Frank planted at the hospital, just in time. George's phone buzzed in her pocket. What's that? The killer stopped moving, stopped breathing, listening for the source of the noise. It's the wind, Georgia tried, frantically rummaging in her pocket to silence the noise. Your phone. He sounded relieved. All right, hand it over. And you'd better tell your friends to throw theirs down, too. Georgia pulled out her phone. Lisa, now she called. She pushed the home button to wipe the screen. What does she know? He must have seen Lisa's name over her shoulder. Nothing. She locked the screen so he couldn't get in and see her recording. He took her phone and threw it hard on a rock. The screen smashed, glitched twice in the darkness, and diffused into nothing. Now tell your friends. Frank, Jake, she called out as loudly as she could. Throw your phones down. Good, the killer said, when two dark spots disappeared into the snow ahead. Now tell them to keep moving. We're almost there. Georgia's heart sank. She hadn't realized how much of her comfort and confidence had been coming from the knowledge that her phone was securely in her pocket. She'd felt better knowing that even if she couldn't make a call, she could probably be traced. Now, they truly were alone on the mountain with a killer. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a mystery-loving friend or consider leaving a review on your favorite podcast player. Most of all, thank you so much for being here today. I loved it, and I'm already excited for next week.